My name is Olivia Smith, and I'm 67 years old. I used to think age was just a number, a soft marker of time that carried wisdom and grace. But that was before my daughter-in-law Sandra looked me in the eye and said, "Get out, Olivia. You smell like old people." Her words weren't just sharp. They were a blade slicing through the fragile threads of love I'd spent decades weaving for my family. My son Michael stood behind her, his eyes fixed on the floor, silent as a stone. That moment in the living room of the house I'd helped pay for, where I'd raised my boy and bandaged his scraped knees, broke something inside me. It wasn't just the words. It was the way they stripped me bare, made me feel like a stranger in my own life. I was a nurse for 38 years, you see. I worked night shifts at St. Mary's Hospital, my hands steady as I held the hands of the dying, my voice soft as I comforted mothers who'd lost their babies. I wasn't rich, but I was proud. My husband George was a carpenter, a man who built things with his hands and his heart. When he passed 10 years ago, I thought I'd already felt the deepest grief life could offer. I was wrong. Losing George was a clean sorrow, a wound that bled but eventually scarred over. But this betrayal from my own flesh and blood was a different kind of pain. It was jagged, festering a hurt that made me question every sacrifice I'd ever made. Let me take you back to that day because it's where everything changed. It was a Sunday in late April, the kind of day where the air smells like lilacs and the sun paints everything gold. I'd been living with Michael and Sandra for 3 years, ever since I sold my little house to help them buy this one. It was a big, rambling place with a wraparound porch, the kind of home I'd always dreamed of for my son. I didn't mind giving up my savings. I wanted Michael to have stability, a place where my grandson, little Tommy, could grow up safe. I moved into the guest room, a small space with a single window that overlooked the garden. I didn't need much: a bed, a dresser, my old rocking chair where I'd read my mysteries at night. I thought I was part of their lives, not just a guest. But Sandra never saw it that way. From the start, she treated me like an inconvenience, a piece of furniture that didn't match her decor. She'd roll her eyes when I offered to cook, saying, "We don't eat heavy food anymore, Olivia." She'd sigh when I folded the laundry, muttering about how I didn't use the right detergent. I tried to make myself small to stay out of her way. I'd garden in the backyard, planting roses like the ones George and I had in our first home. Or I'd read to Tommy, who was only 6 and still loved curling up with me. Those moments with him were my light, the only times I felt like I belonged. That Sunday, though, everything unraveled. I'd made a pot of chicken soup, the recipe my mother taught me, thinking it might bring us together. Sandra came home from her yoga class, her face tight, her eyes scanning the kitchen like she was looking for a crime scene. "What's that smell?" she said, wrinkling her nose. I laughed, thinking she was teasing. "Just soup, dear. I thought we could all have some for dinner." She didn't laugh back. She crossed her arms, her manicured nails tapping against her elbow. "Olivia, this house smells like a nursing home. It's embarrassing." "You're embarrassing." I froze the ladle in my hand, trembling. I looked at Michael, who was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling on his phone. "Michael?" I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think that too?" He didn't look up. He just mumbled, "Mom, maybe it's time you found your own place." My heart cracked open, spilling years of love and trust onto the floor. I wanted to scream, to remind him of the nights I'd stayed up with him when he was sick, the years I'd worked double shifts to pay for his college, the way I'd given everything to make his life better. But I didn't. I just stood there, the soup simmering behind me, its warmth mocking the coldness in the room. Sandra wasn't done. She stepped closer, her voice low but venomous. "Get out, Olivia. You smell like old people, and I'm tired of pretending you fit here." I don't know how long I stood there, but it felt like an eternity. Finally, I set the ladle down, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked to my room. I packed a single suitcase, my clothes, a photo of George, my Bible, and the silver locket Tommy had given me for Christmas, the one with his picture inside. I didn't cry. Not then. I was too stunned, too hollowed out by the realization that the people I loved most didn't love me back. I left that night driving to a motel on the edge of town. The room was small with faded wallpaper and a bed that creaked, but it was mine. I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the locket in my hand. Tommy's little face smiling up at me. I thought about him, about how he'd run to me when Sandra yelled, how he'd whisper, "I love you, Grandma," when no one else was listening. I thought about George, too, how he'd always said, "Live. You're stronger than you know." I didn't feel strong. I felt discarded like an old coat nobody wanted anymore. The next morning, I called my old friend Ruth, who lived across town. Ruth was a retired librarian, a woman with a laugh like a bell and a heart as big as the sky. She didn't hesitate. "Come stay with me, Liv. You don't need to be alone." I didn't want to impose, but I had nowhere else to go. Ruth's house was small, but warm, filled with books and knitted blankets and the smell of chamomile tea. She hugged me when I arrived, and for the first time since that awful Sunday, I cried. I cried for the home I'd lost, for the son who'd turned his back on me, for the grandson I might never see again. Ruth didn't say much. She just held me her hand, patting my back like I was a child. That first week was a fog. I'd wake up in Ruth's guest room, my eyes swollen from crying, my chest heavy with grief. I'd think about Sandra's words, "You smell like old people," and feel shame curl inside me. Was that what I was now? Just an old woman, useless and unwanted. I'd look in the mirror and see the lines on my face, the gray in my hair, and wonder when I'd stopped being Olivia, the woman who'd saved lives and built a family. Ruth saw my pain and wouldn't let me sink. She'd drag me to her garden, hand me a trowel, and say, "Plant something, Liv. It'll grow just like you will." I didn't believe her, but I planted anyway marigolds bright and defiant, because George had loved them. One afternoon while we were pulling weeds, Ruth asked about Tommy. I told her how Sandra had been fighting with Tommy's father, Tom, her ex-husband, over custody. Sandra wanted full control, saying Tom was unreliable, but I knew better. Tom was a good man, a mechanic who'd always treated Tommy with kindness. He'd bring Tommy to see me when Sandra wouldn't, sneaking him over for ice cream and stories. I hadn't seen him since I left, but I missed him almost as much as I missed my grandson. Ruth listened, her eyes sharp. "Liv," she said, "you've got a pension, don't you? And some savings." I nodded, confused. "Then use it," she said. "Use it to fight for what matters." Her words lit a spark in me, small but stubborn. I didn't know what I'd do, but I knew I couldn't let Sandra erase me. I thought about Tommy, about the way he'd cling to me, about the fear in his eyes when Sandra shouted. I thought about Tom fighting for his son, and how he'd always respected me even when Sandra didn't. That night, I sat at Ruth's kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notebook. I started writing numbers, plans, possibilities. My pension wasn't much, but it was steady. I had a little saved from selling my house, too tucked away in a bank account Sandra didn't know about. I wasn't sure what I was planning, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of purpose. I didn't tell anyone, not even Ruth, but I called Tom the next day. His voice was warm, surprised. "Olivia, God, it's good to hear from you. Are you okay?" I told him I was, though it wasn't entirely true. I asked about the custody case, and he admitted it was tough. Sandra had a fancy lawyer, and Tom was struggling to keep up. "I just want Tommy to be safe," he said, his voice breaking. "He deserves that." I didn't say much, just listened, but my mind was racing. That night, I made a decision. I'd help Tom. Not because I hated Sandra, though I won't lie, part of me did, but because Tommy deserved a father who loved him. And maybe, just maybe, I deserved to be seen again. The decision to help Tom felt like a secret I carried in my chest, fragile but warm, like a candle flickering in a storm. I didn't tell Ruth, though she must have sensed something shifting in me. That first week at her house, I'd been a ghost, drifting through her rooms with a heaviness that made my bones ache. But now, with this quiet resolve, I began to feel the edges of myself again. It wasn't hope, not yet, just a stubborn refusal to let Sandra's words define me. "You smell like old people." Every time I remembered her voice sharp and cruel, it stung, but it also fueled me. I wasn't done, not by a long shot. I started small because that's all I could manage. The motel had been a temporary refuge, but I knew I couldn't stay there bleeding money I didn't have. Ruth insisted I stay with her, but I didn't want to be a burden. I spent hours on the phone with my bank sorting out my pension and the savings I'd tucked away. It wasn't a fortune. Nursing doesn't make you rich, but it was enough to give me options. I found a small apartment in town, a one-bedroom place above a bakery that smelled of fresh bread every morning. The walls were faded yellow, the floors creaked and the windows rattled in the wind. But when I signed the lease, I felt a spark of pride. This was mine. Sandra couldn't take it from me. Moving in was a quiet affair. Ruth helped me carry my suitcase and a few boxes I'd stored in her garage, things from my old life with George, like his favorite coffee mug and a quilt my mother had made. I didn't have much, but I arranged it with care, the quilt on the bed, the mug on the kitchen counter, a photo of Tommy on the nightstand. I hung a small mirror by the door, and when I caught my reflection, I barely recognized myself. My hair was grayer than I remembered. My eyes tired, but there was something else there too, a glint of determination I hadn't seen in years. I thought of George, how he'd call me Liv, my fighter, and I whispered to the empty room, "I'm still here, George. I'm still fighting." The apartment became my sanctuary, but it was also where my plan took shape. I didn't want to just help Tom. I wanted to do it in a way that mattered, that lasted. I called him again this time, asking for details about the custody case. He was hesitant at first, not wanting to burden me, but I pressed gently until he opened up. Sandra's lawyer was relentless, painting Tom as an unfit father, claiming his mechanic's salary couldn't support Tommy's lifestyle. It was nonsense. Tommy didn't need designer clothes or private tutors. He needed love, the kind Tom gave freely. But court battles aren't won on love. They're won on money and strategy, and Sandra had both. I asked Tom about his lawyer, a young public defender named Clara, who was doing her best but was overworked and underfunded. "She's smart," Tom said, "but she's drowning. Sandra's team files motions just to wear us down." I listened, my heart racing. I didn't know much about law, but I knew about fighting for what's right. I told Tom I wanted to help, though I didn't say how much. "Olivia, you don't have to," he said, his voice thick with gratitude. "You've already done so much for Tommy." I brushed it off, telling him it was for my grandson, but deep down, it was for me too. I needed to prove I wasn't invisible. That night, I sat at my wobbly kitchen table with a calculator and a notepad. My pension came in monthly enough to cover rent and basics, but my savings were the key. I'd kept them hidden even from Michael because George had always said, "Liv, hold something back for yourself," just in case. I never thought I'd need it for this, but now it felt like a lifeline. I calculated what I could spare without leaving myself vulnerable. It was a risk, but Tommy was worth it. I decided to start with a donation to Clara's office, anonymous, to help with Tom's case. I didn't want anyone knowing it was me, not yet. The next morning, I drove to the bank and arranged a transfer. It wasn't a huge amount, just enough to cover some legal fees and maybe a few extra hours of Clara's time. I told the bank to make it anonymous, no trace back to Olivia Smith. When I left, my hands were shaking, but my heart felt lighter. It was the first time in months I'd done something that felt like power, not surrender. I didn't tell Tom, didn't tell Ruth. This was my secret, my quiet rebellion against the woman who'd tried to erase me. Life in the apartment settled into a rhythm. I'd wake early, the scent of bread from the bakery below drifting through my window. I'd make coffee in George's mug, sit by the window, and watch the town come alive. I started walking to the library where Ruth still volunteered, and we'd spend afternoons sorting books or sipping tea in the break room. She didn't ask about my plans, but she'd look at me sometimes, her eyes soft, and say, "You're finding your way, Liv. I can see it." I wasn't sure I believed her, but I wanted to. One day, while shelving books, I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. Two women at a nearby table were talking about Sandra. "She's telling everyone she's getting full custody," one said. "Says Tom's a deadbeat and the judge is on her side." The other laughed. "She's got that big house, Michael's business is doing well. How can Tom compete?" I stood behind the shelves, my hands trembling, a book forgotten in my grip. I wanted to march over and tell them the truth about Sandra's cruelty, about Michael's silence, about the house I'd helped buy. But I didn't. I just listened, letting their words fuel the fire inside me. When I got home, I called Tom again. "How's it going?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He sighed. "It's tough, Olivia. Sandra's pushing hard and I'm running out of steam. But Clara says we've got a shot if we can keep fighting. I told him to hang in there, that things would work out." After we hung up, I went back to my notepad. The first donation had been a start, but it wasn't enough. I needed to do more to make sure Tommy had a chance at a life with his father. I looked at my savings again, then at the silver locket on my nightstand. It was a gift from Tommy, but it was also valuable, an antique George had bought me years ago. I could sell it, add the money to Tom's cause. The thought hurt, but it also felt right. I didn't sell the locket right away. Instead, I started small acts of defiance, ways to reclaim myself. I joined a gardening club at the community center where women my age laughed and shared stories over pots of geraniums. They didn't know my pain, but they welcomed me, calling me Liv with warmth that made my throat tight. I bought a new dress, a soft blue one that made me feel like the woman I used to be. I even started writing letters to Tommy, not to send, but to keep pouring out my love for him on pages I hid in a drawer. Each step was small, but together they built something inside me, a foundation, a strength I'd forgotten I had. One evening, Ruth came over for dinner, bringing a bottle of wine and her infectious laugh. We sat at my tiny table eating pasta and talking about old times. She asked about Michael, and for the first time, I didn't cry. I told her about Sandra's words, about Michael's silence, about the house I'd given up. She listened, her face soft but fierce. "Liv," she said, "you're not done yet. You're just beginning." Her words echoed George's, and I felt a tear slip down my cheek. Not from sadness, but from the realization that she was right. I wasn't done. I was just starting to fight. The next day, I called a lawyer, not Clara, but someone I'd known from my nursing days, a woman named Margaret who handled estates and trusts. I wanted to know my options to see what I could do with what I had left. Margaret was kind but direct. "Olivia, you've got more power than you think," she said. "Your pension, your savings, even that locket, they're yours to use. And if you want to protect Tommy, there are ways." We talked for hours, and when I left her office, I felt a weight lift. I wasn't just helping Tom anymore. I was building something for myself, for Tommy, for the future. I started donating more to Tom's case, still anonymous, still careful. Each transfer felt like a brick in a wall I was building around my heart, protecting it from the pain of Sandra's words. I didn't hate her, not exactly. Hate is too simple. I pitied her, the way she clung to control, to appearances, to a life that sparkled on the outside but was hollow within. I thought of Michael, too, and the boy he'd been, the one who'd hug me and say, "I love you, Mom." That boy was gone, but I couldn't stop loving him even if it hurt. One night, I took the locket out and held it, the silver cool, against my palm. I thought of Tommy's smile, of George's love, of the life I'd lived. Selling it would hurt, but keeping it wouldn't bring Tommy back. I decided to take it to an antique dealer the next day. It was a small choice, but it felt monumental, like I was finally choosing myself. As I fell asleep, the locket on my nightstand, I whispered to the darkness, "I'm not old Sandra. I'm Olivia, and I'm not going anywhere." The morning I decided to sell the locket, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was as if the fog of grief and betrayal had parted, revealing a path forward not wide or grand, but mine. I held the locket in my hand, its silver surface catching the early light filtering through my apartment's window. Tommy's picture was still inside his gap-toothed smile, a reminder of why I was doing this. I didn't want to let it go, but I knew it wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a choice, a way to take the love it represented and turn it into something real for my grandson. I slipped it into my purse, my fingers lingering on its cool edges, and headed out the door. The antique dealer was a kind man named Mr. Larson with wiry glasses and a shop cluttered with treasures from other people's lives. He recognized the locket's value, immediately tracing its intricate engravings with a careful finger. "This is beautiful, Olivia," he said, his voice soft. "Mid-20th century, excellent craftsmanship. Are you sure you want to part with it?" I hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing against my chest. I thought of George buying it for me on our 25th anniversary, how he'd said, "Liv, this is for the years we've got left." I thought of Tommy pressing it into my hand last Christmas, his eyes bright with pride. But then I thought of Sandra's voice, "You smell like old people," and Michael's silence, and I straightened my shoulders. "Yes," I said, "I'm sure." Mr. Larson offered a fair price, more than I'd expected. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make a difference, enough to fund more of Tom's legal fees, to give Clara the resources she needed to fight for Tommy. I left the shop with a check in my purse and a strange mix of grief and relief in my heart. The locket was gone, but I felt lighter, as if I'd shed a layer of the pain I'd been carrying. I drove straight to the bank and deposited the money into my savings, earmarking it for Tom's case. Another anonymous donation, another quiet step toward justice. Back at my apartment, I started to see my life differently. The small space, once a reminder of what I'd lost, began to feel like a canvas for what I could build. I hung curtains I'd sewn myself bright yellow to match the marigolds I'd planted with Ruth. I bought a secondhand bookshelf and filled it with novels and gardening books, their pages a promise of new stories to live. I even started cooking again simple meals like the ones George and I used to share: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, a slice of pie for dessert. Each act was a reclamation, a way of saying, "I'm still here, Sandra. I'm still Olivia." Ruth noticed the change. One afternoon as we sat in her garden, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're blooming, Liv," she said, her eyes crinkling with a smile. "Like those marigolds you planted." I laughed, the sound surprising me. It had been so long since I'd laughed without forcing it. I told her about the apartment, about the gardening club, about the little ways I was finding myself again. I didn't mention the locket or the donations, those were still my secret, but I think she sensed I was carrying something new, something strong. The gardening club became my refuge. The women there, most of them in their 60s and 70s, were like me, widows, mothers, grandmothers who'd faced their own losses but refused to be defined by them. There was Helen, who'd lost her daughter to addiction, but still tended her roses with a tenderness that broke my heart. There was Marjorie, who'd been a teacher and now taught us how to prune lavender with the precision of a surgeon. They didn't know my story, not the whole of it, but they welcomed me with open arms, sharing cuttings and stories and laughter that filled the empty spaces inside me. One day, Helen handed me a packet of sunflower seeds. "Plant these, Liv," she said. "They grow tall, just like you're doing." I took them home and planted them outside my apartment, imagining them reaching for the sky. But even as I grew stronger, the pain of losing Michael lingered. I'd see young men in town who reminded me of him, tall with his dark hair and quiet smile, and my heart would ache. I wrote him letters too, like the ones for Tommy, though I knew I'd never send them. I poured out my love, my hurt, my confusion, asking the questions I couldn't ask in person. Why did you let her say those things? Why didn't you fight for me? The act of writing was a release, a way to hold the love and the pain without letting them consume me. I kept the letters in the same drawer as Tommy's, a hidden archive of my heart. One evening, I got a call from Tom. His voice was different, lighter, almost hopeful. "Olivia, something's changed," he said. "Clara got some funding out of nowhere. She's hiring an investigator to look into Sandra's claims. It's a game changer." My heart leapt, but I kept my voice calm. "That's wonderful, Tom. Where'd the money come from?" He laughed a sound I hadn't heard in months. "No idea. Some anonymous donor. Clara's calling them our guardian angel." I smiled into the phone, my secret warming me like a fire. "That's amazing," I said. "Keep fighting, Tom. For Tommy." After we hung up, I sat by my window watching the sunset paint the sky pink. I felt a surge of pride, not just for helping Tom, but for choosing to act to matter. I thought of Sandra, of her smug certainty that she'd won, and I felt a flicker of defiance. She thought she'd erased me, but I was still here shaping the future in ways she'd never expect. I wasn't fighting for revenge. Revenge is a poison that burns the one who wields it. I was fighting for Tommy, for Tom, for the part of me that refused to be discarded. The next week, I met with Margaret the lawyer again. I wanted to do more to make sure my actions had lasting impact. She suggested setting up a trust for Tommy, something that would protect him no matter how the custody case turned out. "You can fund it with your savings," she said, "and specify how it's used, education, health care, even time with his father." The idea felt right, like a way to give Tommy the stability I'd always wanted for him. We spent hours drafting the paperwork, and when I signed my name, Olivia Smith, I felt a weight lift. This wasn't just about money. It was about legacy, about ensuring my love for Tommy endured. I kept donating to Tom's case, each transfer a quiet act of rebellion. I was careful never giving more than I could afford, but the amounts added up. Clara was able to hire an expert witness, a child psychologist who could testify about Tommy's bond with his father. Tom called me regularly now, updating me on the case, though he never suspected I was the donor. "We're gaining ground, Olivia," he'd say, his voice bright with hope. "I don't know who this angel is, but they're saving us." I'd smile my heart full and tell him to keep going. But there were moments when the loneliness crept back. One night, I found an old photo of Michael in a box, him at 10, grinning on a fishing trip with George. I sat on my bed, tracing his face with my finger, and cried. I missed him, not the man he'd become, but the boy he'd been, the one who'd needed me. I wondered if he ever thought of me, if he regretted his silence. I didn't hate him. I couldn't, but I couldn't forgive him either. Not yet. The wound was too raw, too deep. The gardening club helped pull me through those dark moments. One day, Marjorie invited me to her house for tea, a small gesture that felt like a lifeline. Her home was cozy, filled with photos of her grandchildren and paintings she'd done herself. We talked for hours, and I found myself telling her about Michael, about Sandra, about the house I'd lost. I didn't mention the donations or the trust, but I shared the pain, and she listened, her eyes soft with understanding. "You're stronger than you know live," she said. "You're building something new, even if it hurts." Her words stayed with me, a reminder that strength isn't always loud or bold. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, like a seed pushing through the earth. I started volunteering at the library with Ruth, too, sorting books and helping with story time for the kids. It wasn't the same as being with Tommy, but it filled a void. The children's laughter, their small hands reaching for books, reminded me of why I was fighting. One little girl with braids and a shy smile called me Miss Liv and hugged me after I read her a story. I went home that night and cried not from sadness, but from the realization that I still had something to give. By the time the sunflowers outside my apartment began to bloom tall and golden, I felt like I was blooming too. I wasn't the woman I'd been before Sandra's words, nor was I the broken one who'd left her house. I was something new. Olivia Smith, a woman who'd been hurt but refused to be erased. I looked at the trust papers on my table, the bank statements showing my donations, the sunflower seeds Helen had given me, and I knew I was on the right path. Sandra thought she'd won, but she didn't know me. She didn't know the strength I was building, quiet and unshakable, with every choice I made. The sunflowers outside my apartment grew taller each day, their bright faces turning toward the sun, and I found myself mirroring them, reaching for light I hadn't known I could still find. It was late summer now, and the air carried the weight of change, crisp mornings, golden afternoons, the faint promise of autumn. My life had settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar, like a song I'd forgotten, but was learning again. The apartment, once a stark reminder of my exile, had become a home. The yellow curtains swayed in the breeze, the bookshelf overflowed with stories, and George's coffee mug sat on the counter, a quiet anchor to the past. But it was the trust for Tommy, the secret donations to Tom's case that gave me purpose, a fire that burned steady and low, warming me from within. I'd started to see myself differently, not as the woman Sandra had tried to reduce to a stereotype, but as Olivia Smith nurse, mother, grandmother, fighter. The gardening club, the library, Ruth's unwavering friendship, they were threads, weaving a new tapestry of my life. Yet the pain of Michael's betrayal lingered, a shadow that crept in during quiet moments. I'd see a young man in town, his shoulders broad like Michael's, and my heart would twist. I'd hear a child laugh, and Tommy's face would flash in my mind. I carried them both, love and loss intertwined, but I was learning to carry them without breaking. One morning, as I sipped coffee by the window, I got a call from Margaret, my lawyer. Her voice was calm but purposeful. "Olivia, the trust is finalized. Tommy's future is secure education, medical care, even visitation with Tom if you want to specify it." I closed my eyes, relief washing over me. The trust wasn't just money. It was a promise, a way to protect my grandson no matter what happened in court. "There's more," Margaret said. "You mentioned a family heirloom, a ring from your mother. If you're serious about selling it, I know someone who can get you a good price. It could fund the trust further or go toward Tom's case." I hesitated, my fingers brushing the simple gold band I wore on a chain around my neck. My mother's ring, plain but precious, was one of the last pieces of her I had. Selling it would hurt, but it would also mean more for Tommy. I told Margaret I'd think about it, but deep down, I already knew. The ring, like the locket, was a symbol of love, but love isn't meant to sit in a box. It's meant to act, to build, to endure. That afternoon, I drove to a jeweler in town, a woman named Carla, who'd been recommended by Marjorie from the gardening club. Carla's shop was small, filled with sparkling treasures, but her eyes were kind, not calculating. I slipped the chain off my neck and handed her the ring, my throat tight. "It's not fancy," I said, but it meant the world to my mother. Carla examined it, her fingers gentle. "It's beautiful, Olivia, not because of the gold, but because of the story it carries. I can offer you a good price." She named a figure higher than I'd expected, and I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "For my grandson," I said, and she smiled, understanding. The money from the ring went straight into the trust, with a portion funneled anonymously to Tom's case. I was careful always, anonymous, always discreet. I didn't want thanks or recognition. I wanted results. Tom called me a few days later, his voice bright with excitement. "Olivia, you won't believe it. Clara's got a new strategy, documents, witnesses, the works. Someone's funding us, and it's turning the tide." I smiled, my heart swelling. "That's wonderful, Tom," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Who's the donor?" He laughed, a sound full of relief. "Still don't know. Clara's calling them our miracle worker." I bit my lip, warmth spreading through me. Miracle worker. I liked that. With the trust in place and Tom's case gaining ground, I felt a shift inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was building. I started volunteering more at the library, reading to children, and helping Ruth organize community events. The kids called me Miss Liv, their small voices wrapping around my heart like a hug. One boy with curly hair and a mischievous grin reminded me so much of Tommy that I had to blink back tears. After story time, he tugged my sleeve and said, "You're nice, Miss Liv. My grandma's nice too." I knelt down smiling and said, "I bet she loves you very much." That night, I wrote another letter to Tommy telling him about the sunflowers, the library, the life I was making. I didn't know if he'd ever read it, but it felt like a bridge, a way to keep him close. The gardening club grew into something more too. Helen, Marjorie, and the others weren't just friends. They were family, the kind you choose. We started a project to plant a community garden behind the library, a place for kids and families to grow flowers and vegetables. I threw myself into it, digging in the dirt, hauling compost, laughing with the others as we sweated under the sun. One day, as we planted tulip bulbs, Helen pulled me aside. "Liv," she said, her eyes searching mine, "you've got a spark now. Whatever you're doing, it's working." I hugged her, my throat too tight for words. She didn't know about the trust or the donations, but she saw me, and that was enough. I started taking risks, small ones that felt huge. I signed up for a painting class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the courage for. My first canvas was a mess, blotchy colors, crooked lines, but I loved it. I hung it in my apartment, a reminder that I could still create, still surprise myself. I bought a new coat, a deep green one that made me feel vibrant, not old. I even went to a concert in town, a local band playing folk music, and swayed to the rhythm my heart liked. Each choice was a brick in the wall of my new life, solid and unshakable. But the past wasn't done with me. One afternoon, as I was leaving the library, I saw Michael's car parked across the street. My heart stopped, my breath catching in my throat. He didn't see me, but I saw him. His face tired, his shoulders slumped. For a moment, I wanted to run to him to ask why, to beg him to be my son again. But I didn't. I turned and walked away. My steps steady, my head high. I wasn't ready to face him, not yet. The hurt was still too raw, the questions too heavy. I went home and wrote another letter, this one shorter. Just a few lines, Michael. "I love you, but I don't know if I can forgive you. Not yet." I tucked it away, the act of writing enough to keep me from falling apart. Tom's calls became more frequent, each one a lifeline. The case was heating up with hearings scheduled and new evidence coming to light. Sandra's lawyer was still aggressive, but Clara was holding her own thanks to the anonymous funds. "We're close," Olivia Tom said one night, his voice thick with emotion. "I might actually get to be Tommy's dad again." I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. "You're already his dad, Tom," I said. "You always have been." After we hung up, I sat in the dark, the weight of my secret pressing against me. I was helping, but it was exhausting too, carrying this alone. Ruth sensed something, though I never told her the full truth. One evening, as we sat on her porch, she handed me a cup of chamomile tea and said, "Liv, you're carrying a lot. You don't have to tell me what it is, but you don't have to carry it alone." I looked at her, my oldest friend, and felt a wave of gratitude. "I'm okay, Ruth," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. I wasn't whole, not yet, but I was getting there piece by piece. I started planning bigger thinking beyond the trust and the donations. Margaret had mentioned a scholarship fund, something I could set up in Tommy's name or even George's to help kids like him. The idea excited me, a way to extend my love into the world, to make a mark that Sandra couldn't erase. I met with Margaret again, and we sketched out a plan, small to start, funded by what was left of my savings and maybe some fundraising with the gardening club. The thought of it, of creating something lasting, made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in years. One night, as I watered the sunflowers, I looked up at the stars and thought of George. "I'm doing it, love," I whispered. "I'm fighting like you said." The stars blinked back, silent but steady, and I felt him with me, his strength in my bones. I wasn't the woman Sandra had tried to break. I was Olivia Smith, and I was growing tall and bright, like the sunflowers outside my door. The fight wasn't over, but I was ready for whatever came next, armed with my quiet strength and the love I refused to let die. The sunflowers were in full bloom now, their golden petals a quiet triumph against the fading summer light. I'd stand by my window each morning, coffee in hand, watching them sway in the breeze, and feel a kinship with their stubborn beauty. They didn't ask for permission to grow, they just did, reaching for the sky no matter what the world threw at them. I was learning to do the same, rooting myself deeper into this new life I was building one choice at a time. The trust for Tommy was secure. The donations to Tom's case were making a difference, and the scholarship fund was taking shape, a seed of an idea that felt like a legacy. But beneath it all, there was still an ache, a longing for the family I'd lost, for the Michael who'd once been my boy, for the Tommy I hadn't seen in months. I kept busy to hold the ache at bay. The community garden behind the library was thriving with rows of tomatoes, zucchini, and tulips we'd planted together. The gardening club had grown too, drawing in younger families who brought their kids to dig in the dirt. I loved watching the children, their hands muddy, their laughter bright. It reminded me of Tommy, of the way he'd giggle when we planted roses in the backyard of the house I'd lost. I'd kneel beside the kids, showing them how to press seeds into the soil and feel a flicker of hope. Maybe I couldn't be with Tommy now, but I could still nurture, still give. One afternoon, as we were weeding the garden, Helen handed me a small clay pot with a single marigold. "For you, Liv," she said, her eyes warm. "You've brought so much life to this place." I took the pot, my throat tight, and hugged her. The marigold went on my windowsill next to George's mug, a reminder that I was part of something bigger than my pain. The gardening club wasn't just about flowers. It was about roots, about building something that lasted. I started to see my donations to Tom's case the same way, not just money, but roots grounding Tommy in a future where he'd be loved. Tom's calls were a lifeline, each one a spark in the darkness. The custody case was moving faster now, with hearings piling up and Clara's team gaining ground. "Olivia, it's unreal," he said one evening, his voice crackling with excitement. "The investigator found emails Sandra's been lying about her finances, trying to make me look worse. Clara's using it to push for shared custody." My heart leapt, but I kept my tone even. "That's incredible, Tom. How'd you get the investigator?" He laughed, a sound full of wonder. "That anonymous donor again. They're covering everything. Fees, experts, you name it. I don't know who they are, but I owe them my life." I smiled into the phone, my secret a warm weight in my chest. "You don't owe anyone, Tom," I said. "Just keep fighting for Tommy." I was giving more now, stretching my pension and the money from the ring as far as they'd go. It was a risk my savings were dwindling, but I didn't care. Every dollar was a brick in the wall I was building for Tommy, a shield against Sandra's control. I met with Margaret regularly, tweaking the trust, exploring the scholarship fund. She was impressed, her sharp eyes softening when she looked at me. "Olivia, you're doing something extraordinary," she said one day. "Most people would have given up." I shook my head, thinking of Sandra's words, of Michael's silence. "I didn't have a choice," I said. Giving up would have meant they were right about me. The scholarship fund was my new obsession. I wanted it to be more than a dream, something real that could help kids like Tommy, kids who needed a chance, not just money. I talked to Ruth about it, finally letting her in on a piece of my plan. We sat in her kitchen, the smell of chamomile tea filling the air, and I told her about the trust, the fund, the gardening project. I didn't mention the donations to Tom's case. Some secrets were still mine to keep, but I shared enough to feel unburdened. Ruth listened, her hands wrapped around her mug, and when I finished, she reached for my hand. "Liv, you're not just surviving," she said. "You're shining." I cried then, not from sadness, but from the relief of being seen. Ruth threw herself into the scholarship idea, suggesting we host a fundraiser at the library. "We'll get the gardening club involved, the community, everyone," she said, her eyes bright. I hesitated, worried about drawing attention, but her enthusiasm was infectious. We planned a spring event, a garden party with plants for sale, music, and stories from the kids who use the library. I spent evenings designing flyers, my painting class skills coming in handy, and felt a thrill I hadn't known in years. This wasn't just for Tommy anymore, it was for me, for the woman I was becoming. But the past kept tugging at me. One morning, as I walked to the bakery below my apartment for a loaf of bread, I saw Sandra. She was across the street, stepping out of her sleek car, her hair perfect, her smile cold. My heart pounded my hands, clenching the straps of my purse. She didn't see me, but I saw her, and for a moment I was back in that kitchen, hearing her voice. "You smell like old people." I wanted to confront her, to tell her I wasn't gone, that I was fighting in ways she'd never understand. But I didn't. I turned and walked away, my head high, my steps sure. She didn't deserve my anger. She didn't deserve me. That night, I wrote another letter to Tommy, longer this time, telling him about the garden, the scholarship, the sunflowers. "I'm doing this for you, sweet boy," I wrote, "because love doesn't stop even when it hurts." I tucked it away, the act of writing a ritual, now a way to keep him close. I wrote to Michael too, though the words came harder. "I don't know if you're sorry," I wrote, "but I hope you find your way back to who you were." The letters were my anchor, holding me steady as the world shifted around me. The painting class became another outlet. I wasn't good, not by any stretch, but I loved the feel of the brush in my hand, the way colors bled into each other. One week, the teacher asked us to paint something that mattered to us. I painted a sunflower, tall and bright, against a stormy sky. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, a piece of my heart on canvas. I hung it above my bed next to the messy one from my first class and felt a surge of pride. I was creating, not just surviving. The community garden project grew too, pulling in more volunteers. One day, a young mother named Lisa brought her daughter Emma to help plant carrots. Emma was shy with braids like the girl from story time, and she clung to Lisa's leg until I knelt down and offered her a trowel. "Want to help me dig?" I asked. She nodded, and by the end of the day, she was laughing, her hands covered in dirt. Lisa thanked me, her eyes tired but grateful. "You're good with her," she said. "She doesn't warm up to many people." I smiled, my heart full. "Kids just need someone to see them," I said, thinking of Tommy. Tom's case was nearing a critical point. He called one night, his voice tight with nerves. "We've got a big hearing next week, Olivia. Clara thinks we've got a real shot, but Sandra's pulling out all the stops." I heard the fear in his voice, the weight of fighting for his son. "You're doing everything you can, Tom," I said. "Tommy knows you love him." After we hung up, I sat at my table staring at my bank statements. I'd given so much already, but I wanted to do more. I called Margaret the next day, asking about the scholarship fund. "Can we use some of it for legal aid too?" I asked. She nodded, her eyes sharp. "You're building a safety net, Olivia. For Tommy, for others. It's smart." I redirected a portion of the fund to Clara's office, still anonymous, to cover the final push in Tom's case. It was a gamble. My savings were nearly gone, but it felt right. I thought of the locket, the ring, the house I'd given up. They were just things, but Tommy was my heart. I'd give everything for him, and I was. The marigold on my windowsill caught the light, its petals bright, and I whispered to it, to George, to the stars. "I'm doing this for love." The fundraiser was coming together too. Ruth and I spent hours planning the gardening club, buzzing with excitement. We'd sell plants, host a raffle, even have the kids read poems they'd written about the garden. I painted a sign for the event, my hands steady my heart light. It was more than a fundraiser. It was a celebration of what we'd built, of what I was building. I looked at the sunflowers, at the marigold, at the life I'd carved out, and felt a strength I hadn't known I had. Sandra thought she'd broken me, but she was wrong. I was Olivia Smith, and I was rising, quiet and fierce, ready for whatever came next. The fundraiser for the scholarship fund was a week away, and my little apartment had become a whirlwind of activity. The table was covered with flyers. I'd painted lists of tasks and pots of marigolds we'd sell at the event. Ruth was over almost every evening, her laughter filling the space as we folded raffle tickets and planned the garden party. The community had rallied. Helen and Marjorie from the gardening club were donating plants. Lisa and her daughter Emma were baking cookies, and the library kids were practicing their poems. It felt like a dream, this collective effort, this proof that I wasn't alone. But beneath the excitement, there was a current of anticipation, a knowing that Tom's custody hearing was looming and my secret donations were about to face their ultimate test. I woke each morning with a mix of hope and dread. The sunflowers outside my window stood tall, their petals a reminder of what I was fighting for, but the weight of my choices pressed against me. My savings were nearly gone, stretched thin by the trust, the scholarship fund, and the steady stream of money I'd funneled to Clara's office. I'd sold the locket, the ring, even a few of George's old tools I'd found in Ruth's garage. Each sale was a pang, a piece of my past given up, but I didn't regret it. Tommy was worth it. Tom's fight was worth it. And somewhere deep down, I knew I was worth it too. The woman I was becoming, not the one Sandra had tried to erase. Tom called the night before the hearing, his voice a tangle of nerves and determination. "Olivia, tomorrow's the day," he said. "Clara's ready, but I'm terrified. What if it's not enough?" I heard the crack in his voice, the fear of losing his son, and my heart ached. I wanted to tell him about the donations to ease his worry, but I couldn't. Not yet. "You've done everything you can, Tom," I said, my voice steady. "Tommy knows you love him, and that's what matters." He sighed, a sound heavy with gratitude. "You're a rock, Olivia. I don't know how I'd have gotten through this without you." I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. "Just be there for Tommy," I said. "That's all I ask." After we hung up, I sat in the dark, the marigold on my windowsill glowing faintly in the moonlight. I thought of Sandra, of her cold smile, her venomous words. "You smell like old people." I thought of Michael, his silence a wound that hadn't healed. And I thought of Tommy, his small hand in mine, his whisper of, "I love you, Grandma." I'd given everything for him, not out of anger, but out of love, a love that refused to be silenced. I whispered to the marigold, to George, to the stars beyond, "Let this work. Let Tommy be safe." The fundraiser was a burst of color and life. The library's backyard was transformed with tables of plants, strings of fairy lights, and kids running through the grass. Ruth was everywhere directing volunteers with her librarian's precision, while Helen and Marjorie sold roses and tulips to smiling neighbors. I wore my green coat, the one that made me feel vibrant, and moved through the crowd, helping where I could. Emma Lisa's daughter tugged my hand and gave me a cookie, her braids bouncing as she grinned. "For you, Miss Liv," she said, and I hugged her, my heart full. The kids read their poems, their voices small but clear, and I felt tears prick my eyes. This was what I was building, not just for Tommy, but for all of them. The raffle was a hit with prizes donated by local shops, a quilt, a gift card, a basket of books. I donated a painting, one of my sunflowers, and when it was won by a young mother with kind eyes, I felt a surge of pride. The scholarship fund was growing not just from the event, but from quiet donations I'd encouraged through the gardening club. Ruth took the microphone at one point, her voice warm as she spoke about the fund, about giving kids a chance. She didn't mention me, but her eyes found mine in the crowd, and I knew she was speaking for me, too. I stood by the tulips, my hands clasped, and felt a strength I hadn't known I had. This was my legacy, my quiet rebellion against the woman who'd tried to make me small. But the hearing was never far from my mind. That night after the fundraiser, I sat in my apartment, the silence heavy. The marigold was wilting, its petals curling, and I felt a pang of fear. Was it a sign? I pushed the thought away, pouring water into the pot, whispering, "Stay strong, little one." I didn't sleep much, my mind racing with images of Tommy, of Tom, of the courtroom I'd never see. I thought of the money I'd given, the locket, the ring, the trust. It had to be enough. It had to. The next morning I went to the community garden, kneading the earth under my hands. Helen was there, pruning roses, and she didn't ask why I looked tired. She just handed me a trowel and said, "Dig, Liv. It helps." We worked in silence, the rhythm of our movements a comfort. I planted a row of daffodil bulbs, their promise of spring, a quiet hope. As I patted the soil, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Tom. My heart stopped, my hands trembling as I answered. "Olivia," he said, his voice breaking. "We did it. Shared custody. Tommy's coming home with me half the time. I sank to my knees, the trowel falling from my hand. Tears streamed down my face, relief and joy crashing over me like a wave. Tom, that's everything. I managed my voice thick. He laughed a sound raw and full of life. Clara was a genius. That donor, they made it happen. I wish I could thank them. I smiled through my tears, my secret burning bright. They know, Tom, I said. They know. We talked for a while, him spilling details about the judge's ruling about Sandra's stunned silence when the decision came down. I listened, my heart soaring, but I didn't tell him the truth. Not yet. This moment was his Tommy's, and I wanted them to have it. When I hung up, Helen was watching me, her eyes soft. "Good news?" she asked. I nodded, wiping my face. "The best." She hugged me, her arms strong, and I felt the garden around us, the roses, the tulips, the daffodils we'd planted, holding me up. I went home that afternoon and wrote a letter to Tommy, the longest yet. "You're safe, sweet boy," I wrote. "Your dad's got you, and I'll always be here loving you." I didn't write to Michael. Not this time. The space where his name lived was too tender, too raw. The scholarship fund grew, and with it, my sense of purpose. Ruth and I met with the library board pitching it as a community project. They loved it, offering to match donations, and I felt a thrill of possibility. I painted more too, filling my apartment with sunflowers and marigolds, each canvas a piece of my heart. The painting class teacher called me a natural, which made me laugh, but I kept going, loving the way colors told stories words couldn't. I even started teaching a few kids at the library to paint their small hands messy but eager. It wasn't Tommy, but it was close a way to give what I couldn't give him yet. One evening, Ruth came over with a bottle of wine and a question. "Liv," she said, her eyes searching what's next. "You've done so much. Tommy's trust, the fund, the garden. What do you want for you?" I sipped my wine, the question settling into me. I thought of the woman I'd been, the one who'd packed a suitcase and left a house she'd helped build. I thought of the woman I was now planting seeds, painting, fighting quietly for what mattered. "I want to keep going," I said. "To live, not just survive." She smiled, raising her glass. "To living, then?" I started planning a trip, something small, a weekend at the coast where George and I had gone years ago. I wanted to see the ocean, to feel its vastness, to remind myself I was part of something bigger. I bought a journal, not for letters, but for me, sketches, thoughts, dreams. I wrote about the garden, the kids, the sunflowers. I wrote about Tommy, about the day I'd see him again. And I wrote about myself, Olivia Smith, who'd been broken, but was whole again, in a new way, stronger for it. The marigold on my windowsill bloomed again, its petals bright against the autumn chill. I looked at it and saw myself wilting once, but growing still defiant and alive. Sandra hadn't won. Michael's silence hadn't defined me. I had defined myself with every dollar, every seed, every stroke of paint. The fight for Tommy was won, but my fight for me, for my place in the world, was just beginning, and I was ready, rooted deep, reaching for the light. The victory of Tom's custody win was a quiet fire in my chest, burning steady as I moved through the days that followed. Shared custody meant Tommy would have his father a safe harbor from Sandra's sharp edges, and that knowledge was a balm to the wounds I'd carried for so long. But it wasn't the end, not for me, not for the fight I'd begun. The scholarship fund was growing, the community garden was a patchwork of color, and my apartment was a canvas of my new life, with paintings and plants and the faint scent of bread from the bakery below. Yet there was a piece of my story still untold, a truth I'd kept hidden even from Tom. The anonymous donor, the miracle worker who'd turned the tide, was me, Olivia Smith, the woman Sandra thought she'd erased. I wasn't ready to reveal it, not out of fear, but because the moment had to be right, had to mean something. Autumn had settled over the town painting, the trees and shades of amber and crimson. I'd taken to walking through the park each morning, my green coat wrapped tight against the chill, watching leaves fall like memories. I thought of Michael often, his silence a shadow that lingered, but I didn't write to him anymore. The letters to Tommy continued, a stack of them now tucked in my drawer like a promise. I imagined giving them to him one day when he was older, a record of the love that had never wavered even when I couldn't be near him. The thought gave me peace, a way to hold him close without breaking. The scholarship fund was gaining momentum. The library board had approved it as an official program, and Ruth and I were planning a second event, a winter fair, to keep the donations coming. The gardening club was all in offering to sell wreaths and poinsettias, and the kids were writing stories to share their voices, a bright thread in the tapestry of my new life. I painted a banner for the fair, a field of sunflowers under a snowy sky, and hung it in the library, where Ruth hugged me and said, "Live. This is yours. All of it." I shook my head, smiling. "It's ours," I said, and meant it. The community had become my family, not replacing the one I'd lost, but filling the spaces they'd left behind. Tom invited me to see Tommy a week after the hearing. My heart raced at the thought, but I hesitated. Sandra was still part of his life, and I wasn't ready to face her, not yet. I told Tom I'd wait, that I wanted Tommy to settle into his new routine first. "You're his grandma, Olivia," Tom said, his voice gentle. "He misses you." I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. "I miss him too," I said. "Soon." I hung up and sat by the marigold, its petals still bright despite the cold. I whispered to Tommy, "George, I'll see you soon, sweet boy, I promise." The moment of revelation came unexpectedly, like a storm breaking after a long, heavy sky. It was a crisp November morning, and I was at the community garden planting bulbs with Helen and Lisa. My phone buzzed, and I saw Tom's name. His voice was urgent, almost disbelieving. "Olivia, you need to come to the courthouse. Now." My stomach dropped. "What's wrong? Is Tommy okay?" He laughed, a sound edged with shock. "He's fine. It's about the donor. Clara found out who it is. She's telling everyone today, and I think you should be here." My heart stopped, my hands trembling. I hadn't told anyone, not even Ruth. How had she known Tom? I started, but he cut me off. "Just come, Olivia, please." I drove to the courthouse, my mind racing. The marigold's image flashed in my head, its defiance, its life. I thought of the locket, the ring, the house I'd given up. I thought of Sandra's words, Michael's silence, and the strength I'd built brick by brick. If Clara knew, if the truth was out, I wouldn't hide. I was Olivia Smith, and I was done being invisible. The courthouse was a gray stone building, its steps worn by years of stories like mine. I walked in my green coat, bright against the somber walls, and found Tom in the hallway, his face a mix of awe and gratitude. "Olivia," he said, hugging me. "Is it true?" Before I could answer, Clara appeared, a young woman with sharp eyes and a warm smile. She held a folder, her hand steady. "Mrs. Smith," she said, "I traced the donations. The bank slips, the timing, it all led to you." I knotted my throat tight. There was no point denying it. "I wanted to help Tommy," I said simply. She shook her head, her eyes shining. "You didn't just help. You changed everything. The investigator, the expert witness, the motions we filed, it was all you." Tom stared at me, tears in his eyes. "Olivia, why didn't you tell me?" I smiled, my voice soft. "Because it wasn't about me. It was about Tommy." The courtroom was small, packed with lawyers, a few reporters, and to my shock, Sandra and Michael. Sandra's face was a mask, her lips tight, but Michael's eyes met mine, and I saw something regret, maybe, or shame. I didn't look away. I stood tall, my hands clasped, as Clara addressed the room. The anonymous donor who funded this case, she said, her voice clear, is Olivia Smith, the grandmother of the child at the center of this dispute. Without her, we wouldn't have uncovered the truth. Without her, this child wouldn't have his father. The room buzzed heads turning to me, but I kept my eyes on Clara, on Tom, on the truth I'd carried alone. Sandra's mask cracked her eyes, narrowing, but she said nothing. Michael's face crumpled his hands, gripping the bench. I felt a pang not for them, but for the boy he'd been the one I'd loved so fiercely. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes, nodded at me. "Mrs. Smith," she said, "your generosity has made a difference. This court thanks you." I nodded back, my heart pounding, but I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My actions had spoken louder than Sandra's venom, louder than Michael's silence. Outside, reporters swarmed, asking questions, but I waved them off, my voice firm. "I did it for my grandson," I said, and walked away. Tom at my side. He hugged me again, his voice thick. "Olivia, I don't know how to thank you." I smiled, touching his arm. "Just love Tommy. That's enough." He nodded, tears falling, and I felt a weight lift, not just from the secret, but from the pain I'd carried. I'd been seen not as an old woman, but as Olivia, fierce and whole. I went home that night and sat by the marigold, its petals curling but still bright. I didn't write a letter. Instead, I painted a single flower gold against a stormy sky, its roots deep, its face turned to the light. It was me, I realized, and I hung it above my bed next to the sunflowers, a testament to my strength. Ruth called, having heard the news, and her voice was a mix of pride and tears. "Liv, you're a force," she said. I laughed the soundlight. "I'm just me, Ruth. That's enough." The winter fair was a week later, and the community rallied around me not because of the donations, but because I was theirs. Miss Liv, the woman who planted gardens and read stories and painted sunflowers. I saw Tommy that day, brought by Tom, his small face lighting up when he saw me. "Grandma," he cried, running into my arms. I held him, tears falling, and whispered, "I love you, sweet boy." Sandra wasn't there, but Michael was standing at a distance, his eyes on us. I didn't go to him. I didn't need to. Tommy was enough. The scholarship fund grew, and with it, my dreams. I planned the trip to the coast, booked a small cottage by the sea, where I'd walk the shore and sketch the waves. I kept painting, teaching the kids, tending the garden. The reporters faded, but the story lingered, a quiet legend in the town. I didn't care about fame. I cared about the marigold, the sunflowers, the bulbs we'd planted, the roots I'd grown. Sandra had lost not because I'd fought her, but because I'd fought for myself, for Tommy, for love. I looked at Michael one last time as he left the fair, his shoulders slumped, and felt a flicker of pity. He'd made his choice, and I'd made mine. I wasn't invisible. I was Olivia Smith, and my dignity, my quiet strength had silenced them all, not with anger, but with the life I'd built, bright and unshakable like the marigold on my sill. The winter fair had left a glow in my heart, like the fairy lights we'd strung across the library's backyard, soft but enduring against the cold. Holding Tommy that day, feeling his small arms around me, had stitched together a piece of my soul I thought I'd lost forever. His laughter, his whispered, "I love you." Grandma was a melody I carried through the weeks that followed, a reminder that love, real love, doesn't fade even when the world tries to break it. I saw Michael's face in the crowd, his eyes heavy with something I couldn't name, regret perhaps, or the ghost of the boy he'd been. I didn't go to him, didn't bridge the gap. I'd spent too long chasing a son who'd chosen silence. Now I was choosing myself and Tommy and the life I'd built from the ashes of Sandra's cruelty. The marigold on my windowsill had finally wilted its petals, curling like tired hands, but I didn't throw it out. I pressed one petal into my journal next to a sketch of the sea I'd drawn for my upcoming trip to the coast. The pot stayed empty, but waiting, a symbol of what could grow again. I'd learned that about myself, that I could wilt, could falter, but I could also bloom over and over, no matter how harsh the season. The community garden was dormant, now blanketed in frost, But the bulbs we'd planted, daffodils, tulips, hyacinths, were waiting too, their promise tucked beneath the earth. I walked there often, my green coat bright against the gray, and felt the roots of my new life holding me steady. Tommy came to visit me now, brought by Tom on weekends when Sandra's time with him ended. Those days were my sunlight, bright and fleeting. We'd bake cookies in my tiny kitchen, his small hands sticky with dough or paint, together his canvases wild with color. I gave him a pot of his own and we planted sunflower seeds, setting it by my window next to the empty one. "They'll grow tall, Grandma." He said, his eyes shining, and I kissed his forehead, my heart full. "Just like you, sweet boy." I didn't ask about Sandra, didn't let her shadow touch those moments. Tommy never mentioned her either, but I saw the tension in his shoulders sometimes, the way he clung to me a little longer before leaving. I couldn't fix that, not yet, but I could love him fiercely and without reservation, and I did. The scholarship fund was thriving, a small but steady light in the community. The winter fair had raised more than we'd hoped, and with the library board's matching funds, we'd started accepting applications. The first was from a girl named Mia, a quiet teenager who loved books and dreamed of college, but whose parents couldn't afford it. I met her at the library, her application in hand, and saw myself in her shy smile, her hunger for a chance. "You'll get there, Mia," I told her. And when we awarded her the first scholarship, I cried not from sadness, but from the joy of giving what I'd never had. Ruth hugged me, whispering, "This is you, Liv. This is your heart." I shook my head, smiling. It's all of us. I kept painting my apartment now, a gallery of sunflowers, marigolds, and stormy skies. The kids at the library loved my classes, their laughter filling the room as we smeared paint and told stories. I wasn't an artist, not really, but I was a storyteller, and each canvas was a chapter of my life: grief, strength, love, defiance. I gave one to Helen, a rose against a dawn sky, and she hung it in her living room, calling it Liv's Heart. Marjorie got a tulip, Lisa a daffodil, and Ruth a sunflower, each a piece of me, a thank you for seeing me when I couldn't see myself. The trip to the coast was a week away, and I was ready. I'd booked a cottage by the sea, small but cozy, with a window facing the waves. I packed light a journal, my paints a photo of Tommy and George's coffee mug, because I wanted him with me. I imagined walking the shore, sketching the horizon, letting the ocean wash away the last of my pain. I wasn't running from anything, not anymore. I was running toward myself, toward the woman I'd become. Olivia Smith. Not old, not broken, but alive, vibrant, whole. Michael called one evening, unexpected, his voice a shock after months of silence. "Mom," he said, and I froze my hand gripping the phone. I'm sorry." The words were heavy, raw, but I didn't soften, didn't rush to fill the space. For what Michael, I asked, my voice calm but firm. He stumbled, his breath uneven. "For everything. For Sandra, for not standing up, for letting you go." I closed my eyes, the ache rising, but I didn't cry. I'd cried enough. "I needed you," I said, "and you weren't there." He was quiet, and I could hear his tears, but I didn't comfort him, not this time. "I love you, Michael," I said, "but love isn't enough. You have to choose it every day. I'm choosing me now." I hung up my hands, shaking, but my heart steady. I didn't forgive him, not yet, but I left the door open a crack for some day. The community garden held a small ceremony before I left for the coast, a thank you for the scholarship fund, the garden, the life I'd helped build. Ruth spoke, her voice warm, and the kids gave me a painting they'd made together, a field of flowers with Miss Liv, written in bright letters. I hugged them, all my throat tight, and when Helen handed me a new marigold, its petals vivid, I laughed through my tears. "Plan it when you get back," she said, and I nodded, tucking it into my bag. The garden was my home, not the house I'd lost, but this place of roots and growth where I'd found myself again. I saw Tommy the day before I left, and we planted the sunflower seeds in his pot, their green tips just breaking the soil. "They'll be big when you get back, Grandma," he said, and I hugged him, his warmth, the light I'd carry with me. Tom watched us, his eyes soft, and when Tommy ran to play, he took my hand. "Olivia, I know what you did," he said. "Clara told me everything. I can't repay you, but I'll spend my life trying." I shook my head, smiling. "You already have, Tom. You're Tommy's dad. That's enough." He hugged me, and I felt the weight of my secret lift, not because it was known, but because it had done what I'd meant it to do. The cottage by the sea was everything I'd hoped. The waves crashed outside my window, their rhythm a song of endurance. I walked the shore each morning, sketching the horizon, the gulls, the way the light danced on the water. I painted, too, a single canvas, a marigold by the sea, its roots deep, its face turned to the sky. I wrote in my journal not letters, but thoughts, dreams, truths. "I am Olivia Smith," I wrote, "and I am enough." The words felt like a vow, a promise to the woman I'd become, the one who'd fought, quietly, loved fiercely, and bloomed despite the storm. On my last day, I stood by the water, the marigold from Helen in my hand. I didn't plant it there. Its roots belonged in the garden with the others, but I held it, its brightness, a mirror of my own. I thought of Sandra, her venom no longer a blade, but a faded echo. I thought of Michael, his apology, a seed that might grow or might not. I thought of Tommy, safe with his father and the scholarship fund, the garden, the paintings, the life I'd built. I thought of George, his voice in my heart. Live, my fighter. I was still fighting not against anyone but for myself, for love, for the light I'd found. I went home and planted the marigold in the community garden next to the daffodil bulbs, its roots sinking deep. The kids ran to me, their voices bright, and Ruth hugged me, her laugh, a welcome home. Tommy came that weekend, and we painted his sunflower pot, thriving, his smile, my son. I didn't see Michael, didn't hear from him, but I was at peace. Forgiveness would come, or it wouldn't. I didn't need it to live. I lit a candle that night, one I'd bought by the sea, its flame small but steady. I set it by the marigold, its light dancing on the petals, and whispered a truth I'd learned through every loss, every choice, every bloom. Your worth isn't measured by who accepts you. I said to the candle, to the marigold, to myself, but by how you choose to honor yourself. I blew out the flame, the smoke curling like a prayer, and went to bed. My heart whole, my roots, deep my life. A garden I'd grown with my own hands, bright and unbroken, forever mine.